If you got a call tomorrow telling you that you only had a year to live, what would be your biggest regret? For our guest today, Amit Gupta, this wasn't a hypothetical question. When Amit was 19, he was the quintessential Silicon Valley founder, endlessly optimistic about tech, very focused on raising money to scale, and just in love with the valley. At 19, he dropped out of school to raise almost $1.5 million to build his company, The Daily Jolt, which unfortunately didn't make it out of the dot-com bubble. But then he started another company called Photojojo out of his passion for photography, which is entirely bootstrapped, which he scaled to almost $10 million in revenue within just 6 years and eventually sold it. But it was in 2011 when he got that life changing call from a doctor, informing that he had acute myeloid leukemia, a sort of blood cancer that was incredibly aggressive. And he needed a bone marrow transplant, for which finding the perfect match had the odds of 1 in 20,000. Yet, after a year of his friends and family doing everything they could to help save his life, the miracle happened. He found the perfect match. Since his rebirth in 2012, Amit has traveled various countries, he's gotten a dog, he learned how to draw, and he even did a cross-country trip on a motorcycle. And a few years ago, he started another company called Sudowrite, an AI writing partner for novelists and fiction writers. Very excited for you to watch this podcast. Amit Gupta, ladies and gentlemen. So, Amit, in 2012, about 12 years ago, something pretty amazing happened in your life. You started this movement. Your friends and family organized about 100 drives, I read, to help you find this almost 1 in a million or 1 in 20,000 match to save your life. And you actually got a match. So I'd love to know how you've been doing since.
Yeah, I've been doing great. I think all the things you could expect that would happen to somebody who gets a second lease on life have happened to me. Completely shook what I thought was going to happen with my life and changed everything and turned it upside down, probably for better and for worse, and left a large part of who I was behind with that kind of event in the middle of my life. And eventually, I think, brought pieces of it back into my life, as you would expect. So I think I took a journey away from where I was and then slowly have come back to the pieces that I hold most valuable and dear.
Um,
That's a very vague answer.
yeah, I was actually going to ask, can you talk about maybe an example of this piece that went away and then it came back to you?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So I mean, like when I got sick, I was running a company called Photojojo. It was bootstrapped, and it was something that I'd started maybe I want to say like 5, 6 years prior to getting sick. And it, unlike the company prior to that one, I hadn't raised money for this one. It was bootstrapped. I never intended to sell it. It wasn't built to sell. It wasn't built to flip. And so when I got sick and had to leave it, literally overnight and go pay attention to my health, I think I was forced to take a step away from San Francisco and I was forced to take a step away from startups and all that kind of stuff. And so in the intervening years between getting better and now, I uh, left San Francisco. I, did all these different things on my bucket list. I got a dog. I rode a motorcycle. I
Yeah.
like traveled the world, all this stuff, and and found new things that I loved. I learned to write science fiction and fell in love with that. And also rediscovered some of the old things, like starting and running companies. It turns out is something I really enjoy. And even though I left it behind, I sought it out again. So here I am doing it again.
But it sounds like something that you left behind, which is still left behind, is San Francisco. Because you talked about coming back after a year and just feeling like it's not as magical anymore, this city that I fell in love with before.
Yeah, I think San Francisco is an amazing place. I moved there from New York. I lived in New York for 4 or 5 years, and the thing I always loved about New York was that people don't move to New York because it's like a really comfortable place to live. They move there because it's hard and they want to make something of themselves. It's a really ambitious place to live. And if you go there just looking to have a comfortable life, you probably leave very unsatisfied. So that means that when you're there, you're surrounded by people with ambition. And that ambition is very varied. Some people want to be actors or actresses. Some people want to be incredible chefs. Other people want to do startups or going into finance. Basically, anything you can imagine, you can find. And when I lived in New York, the one of the few things you couldn't find, and this was years ago, was people who wanted to be ambitious in tech.
Mm.
It just didn't exist at the time. And so I left. New York looking for that and went to the place where the only thing you could find was people who are looking to be ambitious in tech, which is San Francisco. And that's an oversimplification, obviously, but I think, when you're in San Francisco, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be pushing on your career, ideally in tech, and that's the reason you're there. There's all sorts of reasons why San Francisco isn't a great place to live and, has its own problems, but the one thing that overcomes all that is that it's the best place for tech. So when I left, it was because I wasn't doing that anymore. I didn't want to just be in tech building technology. I wanted to go out and do all these other things. And I think in the intervening time, the world changed. It's much easier to do tech anywhere now. Uh, San Francisco is still the best place to do tech. It's like really hard to argue that fact. Um, but I think it's more plausible and possible elsewhere. And I love visiting San Francisco. I love visiting New York, but I think both of them were the places I needed to be in my 20s and early 30s. I think that was like the place to grow the network, the place to meet the most interesting people, and the place to like embark on new projects and journeys. But I think now in this like next phase of my life, it's no longer where I need to be. Um, yeah, but I still love it. I'll be back there in a few weeks, and I'm excited for that. Yeah,
And where are you right now?
Honolulu, Hawaii.
Right, right. I read that. Honolulu. Right. Well, I would love for you to share briefly about leukemia because you got this call in 2011, I think. Is that right? From a
Hmm.
doctor who said that you
Yeah,
had leukemia. And I don't think most people even know what it is. And you yourself said that you had to go and Google it to see what it is. And so did I. I also went and Googled
yeah,
what it is. So, for the sake of people watching, what is leukemia and what does it mean to get that call from a doctor?
sure. Yeah, in 2011 was working in this startup, was actually starting a second brand under the umbrella of that startup. And was feeling kind of sick. And for a week, I stayed home from work, which is really unusual for me. And then I got this call from a doctor saying I had leukemia and specifically acute myeloid leukemia, which is an aggressive form of it. And leukemia basically just means it's a blood cancer. So it's a cancer of your bone marrow, usually, and your blood cells. And in this case, my marrow was producing ineffective white blood cells. Something had changed such that the white blood cells that were in my bloodstream were not able to fight illness or disease. And obviously, that's bad because that means if you get sick, you don't get better, you just get worse. So that's what leukemia is. And the treatment for this particular leukemia, uh, either you could get chemo, a lot of chemo, and then your odds of surviving were 1 in 4 over the next 4 years, or you could get a perfectly matched stem cell transplant, and then your odds of surviving are 1 in 2, 50% approximately over the next 5 years. Obviously, I wanted the latter if I could get it, but even just 1 50-50 is not great odds. So it was quite a shock to hear that news.
What did you do as soon as you heard that news back then?
Yeah, I got the news and I went to Google and looked up what is acute myeloid leukemia, what does this mean, what do I do? I called my dad, who is a surgeon, and just talked it through with him. And then I headed to the hospital, just the closest hospital. My physician had called ahead, and I was supposed to go there to get antibiotics and transfusions and and fluids. And then the next morning, I got on a plane to the East Coast where my family is and started treatment at Yale Cancer Center. Um, my doctor had told me I would be dead in basically 1 to 2 weeks if I did nothing. So it's a very aggressive form of cancer. He was kind of shocked that I was actually walking around with the degree to which I had already suffered. Um, so yeah, he basically said like start treatment immediately, which is what I did. I didn't tell my roommates, I didn't tell my company, I didn't tell anyone. There was just no time. I li literally just packed a backpack, went to the hospital, went from the hospital to the airport, went from the other airport to the hospital, and then I was there for, the next several months of my life.
But I'm sure your employees and friends asked what's going on. So, what did you tell them when they asked you that?
Yeah, well, I wrote them an email once I got to the hospital and started chemo, and I told them what was happening and what I knew and what I didn't know, which was a lot. And um, then lots of people wrote back and they were very supportive and asking how they could help, and I didn't know at the time how they could help. Um, And then, as I found out that I needed a stem cell transplant and found out that it's very difficult to get one. We have a national registry, the bone marrow registry, Be the Match in the United States, where you can often get matched and people can, for free, enter the registry, which I would encourage anyone listening to do. And if you enter the registry somewhere down the line, if someone matches, you have the option of donating to them. You're not obligated to do so. Um, but the registry is totally voluntary, so you know there wasn't a match for me, and that's usually the case for people who are non-white, because most of the people in the registry in the United States are white. So if you're Asian, if you're Black, if you're Latino, if you're mixed, all those are very difficult to match. So I basically learned that to get that stem cell transplant, which would give me 50-50 odds, I needed a matching stem cell donor. There wasn't a donor, and so I had about a month before I would need to start treatment of some kind after the initial chemo. And that's how long I had to try to find a match. And so my doctors, I said, I'm going to try to do what I can. My doctor said, that's great. Just don't expect that it will work because the time frame is so short. And I think treatment is going to start in like 2 or 3 months, but because it takes a while for people's samples to get into the registry, I only had a month to get them in. So no harm in trying, but it's not going to work. And at this point, I think, at least a dozen friends who are really, emailing me, calling me, trying to see if they could help in some way. And so they started to host donor drives. The first one in New York, and then one in San Francisco, and then they just like spread all across the United States, and then some in India. And basically, we got, tens of thousands of people to go to these drives within a month to swab their cheeks and to send a sample to the NMDP. And these friends of mine literally, saved my life. They wrote posts. They helped spread the posts that I wrote so that millions of people saw them. They created connections so I could go, onto CNN or NPR or whatever and talk about what was happening. They organized the drives every day or two. We would have this like standing conference call where we would discuss all the efforts and kind of coordinate. So it felt like there was a almost like a political war room going on in my hospital room. So on one side, I was fighting cancer and getting chemo and like dying and suffering, and the other side, I was taking conference calls and writing emails for Photojojo, my company, to keep it alive. And then on the third side,
Oh,
I
wow.
was trying to keep on top of the donor drives and get as much word out as possible. Um, but yeah, miraculously it worked. We got so much attention online, so much press all over the place, that we found two matches, and one of them ended up donating, and I got these miraculous stem cells into my body that saved my life. And also, many of these people who stepped up to enter the registry were later called upon to help other people. So like dozens and dozens of people have had their lives saved because of these drives now.
I I read through the story online, and as you said, it's covered in so many places. And I think they even made a page for you called amitneedsyou.com. There's this very quirky
Mhm.
picture of you there smiling, and I'm curious how you had 12 friends who would do anything to save your life, and that is 12 more than what many people have out there. So I'm just curious, how did you form these friendships? Did you expect them to do something like this?
No, I didn't expect it. And I'm not the type of person who's good at asking for help. So I think like asking people to do something for me is really scary. And that's why even writing that first email to tell people what was going on after I got to New Haven was kind of terrifying because I had to tell these people and also ask for help. And I knew that my life literally depended on people helping me. So I had to. And these friendships that I had formed, these connections I'd formed, I'd never formed them obviously with the intention of getting help
Yeah.
finding stem cells years later, but I I formed them because I was living in New York and I was looking for other people that were interested in the same types of stuff that I was. And as I mentioned at the time, there wasn't much of a tech community out in New York, so I was the one organizing meetups and putting on conferences and putting on developer meetups and all this stuff for years. And so I formed a lot of connections with a lot of people who later went on to become leaders in that community and start companies. I, met a lot of people when I moved out to San Francisco, similar kind of vibe. And so when I got sick, it was those same people that saw that one of them needed their help. It wasn't like some random person on the internet. It was It was someone that they knew. It was someone that was like them. And all these people by this point had positions of power. They ran companies or they were high up at Google or whatever. Or they like were, VP of marketing at Virgin America or whatever it was. They had like all these different ways that they could help spread the word, a lot of network of their own. So I think they were happy and excited to help, and they were in a position where they could do it.
Um, it just reminds me of this. There's this medical drama called Grey's Anatomy. You might have heard of it. And there's this scene where this character says that people don't cure diseases because there's a million people out there suffering from it. There's generally just one person suffering from it that just hits you. And it sounds like that's what it was in your friend's cases. It was one person, but now obviously there's this movement that started, and as you said, dozens of people's lives have been saved, and probably many more in the coming years. Um, I uh, I did want to ask one question on this whole experience, because you talked about this 100-day isolation period even after you got the bone marrow transplant, the perfect match, 1 in 20,000. And you said you were
Yeah,
like a baby during that time for all purposes. You
yeah.
couldn't go out, couldn't eat out, you had to be in this isolation room. So for 100 days, could anyone come and see you at that point, meet you?
Yeah, so I stayed with my parents in Connecticut during that period. And like you said, it's basically like being a baby. You have a very fragile new immune system, learning from scratch. So over the course of your life, every time you get sick, your body creates antibodies and learns to kind of deal with that particular virus or bacteria or whatever it is. And I didn't have any of that anymore. My slate had been wiped clean. So just like a baby, any kind of illness would knock me down. And so for 100 days, I couldn't be in crowds, be near strangers, touch things and touch my face, eat food that was not cooked, eat like I couldn't eat like fresh salad, for example, it's too dangerous. Couldn't be around cats, all sorts of kind of crazy things.
Mm.
Um, but I mean, honestly, I don't even remember that period as an unpleasant period. I remember it being just miraculous that I was not in the hospital anymore after spending so long in the hospital, being able to be back in familiar surroundings with people I loved just felt so wonderful. And I think that was actually an opportunity for me to start kind of working down that bucket list. I'd always wanted a dog, and I was allowed to have a dog. So I adopted one, and I spent those first 100 days kind of getting to know this puppy and raising her and taking care of her. And she's not in this room, but she's around here somewhere. So yeah, I remember that time very fondly.
I didn't know you could get a dog in that 100 days as well. But what was the first thing you did when you could come outside of that, when you could just live life again?
I was probably just go out to eat or something. I think I was just so excited to like eat fresh food that was not like, out of a can or fresh or cooked. Um, I mean, the bigger things I did was I had always wanted to ride a motorcycle, so I took
Yeah.
lessons to ride a motorcycle. I got a motorcycle with a sidecar. My girlfriend and I at the time got on that sidecar motorcycle and drove across the country to San Francisco. Um, and then I just started knocking down. Well, then I, worked to get my company in good shape, and then eventually started working down the bucket list of all the other things that I had kind of written down in the hospital room as things I would never get to do again, but I really wanted to.
Um, I know you mentioned some of these things in other places as well. But what is the craziest thing that you wrote down that actually came true? So there's the motorcycle, the dog, and then there's drawing classes as well, you talk about?
Yeah, yeah, I started taking drawing classes in the hospital itself. Uh, I don't know if writing fiction was on it. I think that's probably one of the crazier things to do because it's definitely a labor of love. It's not something that's easily a profession for most people. Um, And honestly, I think motorcycle is probably the craziest thing. Like I think
Yeah.
I got the license, I bought the bike, and it's a very like unconventional, inappropriate bike for, someone who's very fragile and like weak because I could barely walk after the stem cell transplant. Like my daily exercise was just like walking down, making it down all the way down the hall and like walking back. Like that was kind of like going a few extra feet every day. That's kind of the level I was at. So not that long after, a few months after, like getting this motorcycle, it's very difficult to operate. And setting out for this cross-country trip, which is, difficult under any circumstances. Uh, that was interesting. And we didn't make it all the way. We made it maybe half the way before we realized we wouldn't make it all the way before we had to like be at my brother's engagement or wedding or something like there was something going on. So then we had to get a bunch of strangers to help us lift this bike into a U-Haul truck and then drive as fast as we could the rest of the way. But it was so memorable. I mean, there were times on this bike where, we had to make it to the next spot because we were sleeping, 50 miles down the road or 100 miles down the road. And it was dark and it was raining and it was very, very cold. Ice, like sleet, basically, ice cold rain, just pelting my face and my hands. And everything just feels so cold and uncomfortable and wet. And Leah, my dog, is in the sidecar, like shivering underneath the covers, just trying to get away from the water and thinking, why am I being subjected to this torture? And all I had to do was think about how hard it was to be in the hospital and how much pain I felt like getting that transplant and like, just having my body literally like come apart, the skin come off of my, just disgusting stuff. And I was happy. I was like, oh, this is so much better than that. I can ride through this rain all night. It's totally fine. It's nothing. That was a cool experience.
Do you feel that way with starting or running a company right now as well? That I've done that, and that is 1,000 times harder than raising a team or raising money or growing a company.
Yeah, it's so fleeting. I wish I could hold on to it. I think I often lose perspective and I have to bring myself back to center. And I might do that through trying to remember an experience like this. I might do that by just going outside and looking at the sky, like seeing the stars or something. Often that does it for me. Everyone has their own kind of like way to recenter, but I haven't found one yet that sticks forever. But it's a practice to get back.
Gotcha. I am curious if you have any, since we talked about, talked about going outside and looking at the stars. Is there something that you do every single day? Some sort of a routine that you follow?
Not the stars. I mean, there's definitely routines that I follow. I walk the dog every morning and evening, and I think that's a nice like hour a day that I'm outside
Mm.
and with nature. Um, and I exercise every day. I think post-transplant, most people who go through this find that they have like long-lasting fatigue, often for the rest of their lives, and there's just nothing they can do about it. I definitely felt that, and um, the levers you find out you can still affect are diet, sleep, and exercise. So those are things that I started taking very seriously ever since, like making sure I was eating cleanly, making sure I was getting as much sleep as possible, making sure I was active every single day. So those are routines I try to practice every day.
Amazing. I want to talk about your companies. Well, you had several companies, but I think around the Photojojo time is when you said something like, I want to build a company and not a startup, something that is sustainable. And you mentioned you bootstrapped Photojojo versus the previous startup. What about Sudowrite? How did you, is it a company or a startup for you?
Yeah, I think I learned different things in each of these startups. So like I think with my first startup, the Daily Jolt, I didn't know what I was doing at all. I was 19 years old, so I was really learning everything. Um, and we raised money for that one and went through the dot-com boom and bust and tried to, get it back to a solid place and spent a year doing that, 2 years doing that before I got burnt out. And Photojojo felt like a very opposite experience. I was bootstrapped. I didn't want to take money. I wanted to build like a very stable, solid, profitable company and grow it only as much as I could with the money coming in. And then I think Sudowrite, and I learned how to do that. I learned how to like make the numbers work, make the margins work, pay careful attention to all the details so that it works as a business, not just as a product. It doesn't just grow, but grows profitably. And I think Sudowrite was very much a marriage of the two. Both my co-founder and I had previously started companies and sold companies, and neither one of us was looking to start another company at the time. I think we were both writing, so we were both happily like pursuing our hobbies at the time. And so when we finally, almost reluctantly, decided to start this company because we started working on this hobby project and just kept going and going, and we thought we should do it. Um, we were very intentional about wanting to take a middle path. So not try to go out, raise a bunch of money, raise a bunch of money again, raise a bunch of money again, kind of like go bigger and bigger and try to hit these uh, arbitrary targets to just to get to the next round. We didn't want to do that. And also we thought maybe there was something that could be gained from raising a responsible amount of money from in a different way that would enable us to build a better product than if we were just bootstrapping. So yeah, we are not bootstrapping, and we're not kind of trying to ride the VC roller coaster going from Series A, B, C, D, etc. And we're trying to go somewhere between. So far, it's worked. I do think it's a company. It's profitable. Last year was profitable. This year will be profitable. It's growing, and yeah, there's pros and cons of every way of doing it, including this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Just so people know, what is Sudowrite? It's an AI writing buddy for novelists specifically. Is that a
Mhm.
one-line pitch for it, or am I wrong there?
Sure, it works. Yeah.
Okay.
James and I were both spent several years learning how to write fiction. And so we actually met in a writers group. So when GPT-3 came out, which was the first kind of like large language model that was very capable, we started playing with it for our own use. Our writers group got access and we started tinkering, and James built the first version of this tool. And we just saw this moment where in 2020, no one was using this stuff yet, but it was clear that it was going to just change the world. Like, even within just the small, like, writing world, um, you just hadn't had anything that came along besides, grammar check and spell check for I don't know how long. And
Mm.
yet, in these other kind of artistic spheres, whether you think about like photography or videography or cinematography, music, all this stuff, they have very sophisticated tools in the computer that help you bring your vision to life. And writers didn't have that. They just had Microsoft Word. For some reason, it just didn't exist for writers because the technology to play with words and language in the same way as you can play with sound or colors or pixels just didn't exist. So we saw this future where um, it was going to be able to, you would be able to build a Photoshop for writers. You'd be able to build a GarageBand for writers or whatever. And like I said, it was very early. So I think at the time, like you could just see that it was going to be possible, but it was almost not possible yet. And we started building this thing. And uh, yeah, and now it's very possible. And now it's like everyone's doing it. And like it seems so obvious in retrospect. But at the time, I think we faced a lot of skepticism, and it was interesting to have these conversations and have people just be like, no, that's not going to happen.
Right. And sorry, when was Sudowrite founded formally? When did you launch this?
We started working on it in I think summer of 2020, August or September of
Wow.
2020.
And oh, okay, that's before ChatGPT. Oh, 2 years before ChatGPT launched. That is
Yeah.
that is. I didn't know it was that early. And when ChatGPT came out, did that affect Sudowrite's perception? Because someone could think, oh, I could do this with ChatGPT.
Yeah, when ChatGPT came out, I think it was a pretty scary moment for us because we saw that uh, here's a state-of-the-art language model that anyone can use for free, like you said. So why not just use that? Why pay 20 bucks a month for Sudowrite?
Right.
And so that was scary. And what we saw was actually very much the opposite. We saw a lot of people trying ChatGPT because it's free, and then finding that it was useful, but not well suited to what they're trying to do. And then they went out looking for AI for writing or for fiction or
Mm.
whatever and found us. So our growth literally doubled overnight after ChatGPT. Like if you look at our growth curve and you see where ChatGPT launches, it's like the graph just like doubles and keeps going. So that was pretty cool.
Insane. And I'm also curious about. I, a lot of writers would say that the value in writing is actually coming up with the right words, the right sentences, the structures. And I've published 2 books. I'm writing my third one. So I've also been writing for a long time, and there is just a satisfaction in getting the exact words placed in that order.
Yeah, yeah,
And so those writers would say, well, this tool can do that, but then it's not me writing. And there's the other faction of writers who think, well, it's improving what I'm already doing, and it's only what
yeah.
matters is the output. So how do you, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, well, I don't love writing. I love editing. So I would say I'm more in the first camp where I'm very precious with my words and my writing, and I really enjoy finding that turn of phrase or the very specific kind of um, the feeling of the words and the sound, the voice of the phrases and stuff. Um, but I think what we found is that AI can be helpful like across the workflow. So some people really enjoy using it for ideation. Like for me, I often can think of like I write sci-fi, so I can often think of like the world. I have this interesting setup for how this world is different from the world we inhabit today. And then where I struggle is like finding the plot and the characters. Like what is it that goes wrong in this world that's going to make this story interesting? And who needs to exist in this world to exploit this thing that goes wrong in an interesting way that teaches you something? So that's where I struggle, and that's where I often talk to other people, and sometimes I use AI and bounce ideas back and forth to figure out what I want to say and how to best say it. And I think some writers, that part's easy, but they struggle with description. Some people love description, but they hate dialogue. Some people
Mm.
love dialogue, but they just can't imagine writing another fight scene or love scene or something. Some people, all that stuff is great, but they just want to shoot themselves if they have to write a marketing blurb for the book. So like regardless of where you are in the cycle, I think there's a place where AI can serve you. And the way we often think about it is that for many other forms of art, even for writing, actually, in certain formats. Like if you're writing for a TV show, you're not writing solitary. You've got a team of writers. You've got a showrunner who's taking care of the overall arc of the season, and then you've got individual writers who are tasked with individual episodes. Sometimes they team up together. And then you've got like other writers who do promotions and other writers who do other stuff.
Mm.
And for the episodes themselves, an individual episode writer may write an episode, come back to the showrunner. The showrunner is probably going to give them feedback or help them weave it together with the episodes that precede and follow it. And so it's kind of a team effort. And we've heard a lot from like the writers who do both, who do screenwriting and novel writing, that one of the things they hate about novel writing is that it's so solitary because they like the free-flowing ideas and kind of
Mm.
the idea the room where they get to be with other writers and kind of really idea and have fun. And showrunners obviously really enjoy being able to like orchestrate and run this process. So one way we think about it is that AI can give you the ability to have a whole bunch of writers that you can employ to do whatever tasks you want. And so if you want writers to do the marketing stuff or to do that chapter over there, you can do that. You're still responsible for making sure
Mm.
it's your work and it's your voice and it's true to what you want to say. But there's no reason, it just as it wouldn't be wrong to hire someone else to help you write the book jacket copy. We don't think there's anything wrong with you hiring an AI to do the same thing.
I think this is a question that's probably going to be debated for a very long time, honestly, because I'm on Reddit a lot and I see both sides of the camp very passionately like debating for their side,
Yeah,
and I'm still conflicted on where I stand. But it sounds like in your case, you have come to this point where you like to write yourself, use Sudowrite or another tool for editing, trying to make something sound better, and also for brainstorming. Like if you're stuck with, oh, what could happen in this scene, then use it for that,
sure.
right?
Yeah. It really depends on the writer. I think the one thing that we try to remain true to is that we don't think there's much value in the AI just creating stories whole
Mm.
cloth.
Mm.
That's not it's usually not something people want to read if it does it, and it just doesn't do a good job of it. And I think it's the essence of stories is what comes out of our own experiences and what comes out of our lives. So we want it to be an instrument. We want it to be a tool. We want it something to be something that helps you bring out what's inside of you, however that's going to happen.
What have people used it the most for that you've noticed over the years?
Hmm. Well, we started as a very general purpose tool. So you mentioned that it's a tool for novelists, and I think that's because we've seen the novelists get the most value out of it, and so we've tailored the tool more towards that. Uh, James and I started as short story writers, so we don't even write novels ourselves, but I think that's the audience that's taken the most to it, both because it's, you know, as much as I love short stories, it's not the most popular form of stories. Like people don't often read them compared to novels.
Mm.
Um, and I think novels also present more of a challenge. Like it's pretty easy to keep an entire short story in your head as you read it. You might still have to like skim through it when you go back to edit it, but it's only going to take you maybe 20 minutes to do that. You can't really do that when you sit down to edit a novel. So you really have a challenge of keeping it in your head. Like what happened before? What's going to happen next? Like how's this character evolve? What did I set up already? And so there's a lot of stuff that an AI can help with as an assistant, just as a human might help as an assistant in that task. And that only becomes more difficult as you have longer series. A lot of commercial fiction these days is series based. So, and same with TV, like these, something becomes popular, readers want to stay in that world. You don't want to keep entering new worlds. You want to follow these characters through many, many, many seasons of their lives. And
Mm.
so, when you're a writer and you're 6 books into your series,
Hmm.
it's so hard to remember where you've been already and what's happened. And I think that's another place where AI really excels. It can help you with that. It can help with the research. It can help answer questions. It can be that show Bible or story Bible that you're never going to get around to compiling yourself.
Have you seen that people, I'm assuming thousands or tens of thousands of people have used Sudowrite. Have you heard of stories of people telling you that you helped me finish my novel, which I'd been thinking about
Oh
for
yeah.
decades?
Yeah, I think that's really gratifying. If you go into like our Discord, you'll often see these stories of people like finally finishing the novel they started years ago or always dreamed of telling and things like that. And then you see these other stories, we'd hear very often early on, even from professional authors, that like the biggest problem they faced was they would publish a book on Amazon and one day later their readers would be asking them for the next one. And there's like no way they could keep up with that. So,
Hmm.
and you've got, these voracious readers, especially in certain genres. So we've heard from a lot of authors who write for a living. Like this is how they put their bread on their table. And now they can either write more and, bring their readers more stuff that they love. And some authors have done that. Or they can pursue their passion projects. Like maybe they're writing this thing that they know sells, but they also want to write this thing and kind of build up an audience here. They just can't
Hmm.
justify it when they have to make money over here. And Sudore helps them do this thing faster so they can spend more time over here. So we hear those stories a lot. We hear a lot from people who couldn't finish because of some accessibility issue. And I think that's been a big boon for them. I think a lot of the newer tech AI stuff, both what we're doing, also like speech to text and all that kind of stuff has been really helpful to people with accessibility issues. Um, but yeah, I guess my favorite is the ones where we hear that it's made a meaningful impact on their lives, whether it's helped them create a career out of something they loved or tell a story that they've always wanted to bring out into the world and never could.
Beautiful. Um, you said it's you and James co-founders. How big is the team right now?
We are, I think, about 10 full-time and then another 10 contract.
Okay. And what was what was the hardest part of building the tool? So there was GPT-3, and this was before ChatGPT once again. And so,
Yeah.
technically, what was the biggest challenge for you guys?
I think the biggest challenge technically has been that this industry is just moving so fast.
Mm,
And unlike previous companies where I think we've been able to set a kind of schedule, figure out what we're going to build next for this quarter, this next quarter, maybe the whole year, we often find that a new model will drop that unlocks some new capabilities that just weren't even
mm,
possible before. And 2 months in the quarter or a month into the quarter, everything's thrown out the door because why would we work on those things that we had prioritized when this new thing that we've always wanted to do and never thought would be possible just became possible today?
mm,
So that's happened so many times now, and it's both very exciting and very frustrating. But I think it's a very unique characteristic of being in this moment and working in this space. This stuff is just moving so quickly. Um, and so the pace, I think, is a challenge. Um, I think staying right on that edge is very challenging, like being able to like build a thing that just barely became possible and starting to push just beyond it and build a thing that's not possible yet, knowing that the tech is going to catch up and make it possible within the next 6 months or something. So being able to predict where we're
mm.
going so that we can be building for it, I think is challenging but fun.
Is there something you and James predicted that came true in the past?
Yeah, I think like one of our most popular features was something we called Story Engine. It's called Story Bible now, but it was a way to hold a whole like novel's worth of context in the LLM's brain as it's writing. So prior to that, basically the language model is just looking at your current document, even if you had like lots of other chapters and outline or whatever, it couldn't pay attention to those. And there were some technical limitations for that, both in context size in terms of like how much information you could give a model before it would start writing, and in terms of logical reasoning. Like the more you gave it, the more confused it would become and kind of spit out garbage. So we we started working on a prototype for this thing that would allow a model to have way more context and actually be able to kind of write more like a human,
Mm,
these first drafts of chapters. And then it just sat there for months until like the world caught up and the tech got there. So I think that was a big breakthrough. Like we were ready, waiting with this prototype, and the instant I think this GPT-4 dropped, and it allowed us to actually do some of these things. We were ready to slot it in and make it work, and it felt very magical. I remember when that came out, it just kind of blew people's minds.
So what you're saying is, for example, if George R. Martin has these, 7-book series, and then there's hundreds of characters, this story Bible can remember all of that, understand how they're all related to each other, and then give you suggestions based on that.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're like asking to help you develop this next chapter or something, like write a draft or whatever it is, it can pull in the right characters at the right time. It can pull in the right aspects of the right characters relevant to the current moment.
Mm.
One of the things we've been working on for the past year is around tone and voice. I think like one of the complaints that people often have, and we've heard this from day one, is that the AI doesn't sound like them. It sounds kind of banal. It sounds boring. It sounds like a
Yeah.
memo or a book report, not like a novel. And that's not only been a problem from day one, it's actually gotten worse. It's like as the models have gotten bigger and kind of safer, they shy away from the more like complex or controversial topics. And novels will often have complex or controversial topics. They'll have dramatic moments, they'll have sex, they'll have violence, they'll have all sorts of
Yeah.
stuff that the model doesn't want to talk about, but these things happen in the world and they happen in stories and they help us kind of grow and understand the world better, and they're important to talk about. So we've spent the last year doing two things. One is creating a model that can be tuned to an author's voice. So if an author chooses to, they could upload past work and build a model just for themselves that they can use, and it sounds more like them, which means that they can write using it and have a lot less editing work because it doesn't sound like a book report that they then have to like change everything in. And the other is a more general purpose model that's better at fiction in general. This more capable of
Mm.
writing fiction of the type that you would actually want to read. So that's been very exciting too, like developing these new things that feel pretty groundbreaking in fiction and being very close to releasing them,
Wow.
but not yet.
That sounds like a custom GPT, which I still haven't really tried. I know there's a way you can build your own GPT that adapts to your
Mhm.
voice. I haven't checked that out yet. But when you said the first novel I thought of is Lolita, which is this really dark, pedophilic novel. And I feel like an AI would never write that, something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
And
honestly, it's even hard to get it to write a murder mystery or something. Like
right.
always wants things to work out okay. It always wants a silver lining. It always wants, even the villain can only be a villain because he has like ethical quandaries or something, like not because he's actually done anything wrong. It's very challenging to take the sunny sheen off of it, RHLF model.
Mm, very interesting. Um,
Yeah.
I just want to ask one last question on this is you said you write sci-fi and you're also building this company. How do you split the time? Do you still take time to write your novel using Sudowrite?
No. I
No.
think the longer I've been working on this company, the less I've been writing. And that's definitely a pattern I faced with Photojojo, my previous
Yeah.
company too. I started it because I love photography, and then the more I worked on the photography company, the less I was actually taking photos. I think I've resigned myself to that being the case. I'm happy that I feel very lucky that I get to start companies around the thing that I'm most passionate about, and then spend time building stuff for people that are passionate about that thing. But I ultimately become more passionate about building than about whatever the thing was in
Mm.
the first place.
That's a really actually I just realized that about you myself that you did kind of a similar pattern with Photojojo and Sudowrite, that it grew out of a personal passion, and then you wanted to scale that, and then the scaling itself became your passion. You know,
Yeah,
it's very
yeah,
interesting.
exactly.
I wanted to end with this question that you ended your XOXO festival talk with. So I think you ended the talk by asking, if you got a call tomorrow from a doctor who tells you that you're going to die, what will you what will be your top 3 regrets? And I thought about
Hmm.
that myself. And the first thing that came to my mind was telling my parents I love you more would be my first regrets. I wish I'd told that more. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you currently have any regrets? Something that you wish you could do?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a very strong regret. Like nothing comes to mind immediately. I think the one thing that I'm trying to figure out in my life right now is so I had a son a little over 2 months ago. and it's my first child, it's our first child, and I took some parental leave when he was born. Um, and in the process of doing that, I delegated some of my work to other people. I hired an assistant who took on some of the stuff I was doing. And so as I slowly phased back into work, I realized that things were running smoothly without me. Those things that I delegated, they were fine doing them. Some things I stopped doing didn't need to be done at all. And now I have this opportunity to decide where I put my time. As a founder,
Mm.
you're often just like filling holes. You're putting out fires and filling holes, so water doesn't get in. And so that's the natural thing. Just jump back in the boat, start plugging holes and put out fires. I can spend the rest of my life doing that. Um, but I want to be more intentional about it. So I think that's the thing I'm trying to figure out now. Like, how do I choose what part of this or what work in general is most meaningful to me and make sure that that's the thing that I spend my time on. So I think I'd regret if I just blindly went back and did exactly what I was doing before instead of resisting that gravitational pull and making the choice intentionally.
That's an excellent, excellent point that you made. Thank you so much, Amit. This was really fun for me because a lot of the things that you talked about, like writing, fiction, AI, all of it resonates with me in what I'm doing right now. And I've seen you from afar for a while through Rajesh when he introduced me to you, and I've used Sudowrite as well. So it's been a pleasure to actually talk to the person behind it.
Yeah, wonderful to meet you and thank you for having me on.
By the way, before you go, I'm giving away 3 annual Sudowrite memberships, each worth $120 for 3 lucky winners. To enter this contest, all you have to do is visit curiousmaverick.com, join the newsletter, and then comment below Sudowrite. Until next time, take care. Bye.